thank you for attending, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that will benefit. We shall all benefit. The main objective of the workshop, as you've heard, is to create knowledge about climate change within the judiciary as a tool to enhance judicial activism where necessary, to influence government policies and protection of citizens' rights from violation by any entity, and to ensure that government actively protects citizens' fundamental rights. Uganda, being a developing country, is highly susceptible to the effects of climate change, and they increase pressure on protected areas and communities. The government must therefore ensure sustainable development that will improve livelihood and security, especially among the underprivileged. There was, I think, something happened along the Kampala road. Some things have been happening, but the media, the NTV actually, particularly, the one which I watched, a discussion about this climate change and the environment, and they were interviewing some residents in some building where there. What's major complaint was that they used to fetch water from a nearby well, but they now have to walk very many kilometers to get water. So it is affecting us seriously, because you can imagine a poor village woman living in the village having to walk 7 kilometers to collect water which they can use, and she can only collect 1 jerry can at a time. Because we are told that long ago children used to first fetch water for the home before they went to school. We don't want to go back into that age. So if there are boreholes and wells where people can fetch water from, for example, why should they dry up and people have to walk miles and miles away to fetch water? And you know, issues of sanitary hygiene and water sanitation are very serious issues. The judiciary can be effective in enhancing policies that will develop coping strategies and adjustments to climate change. This can be done through appropriately adjudicating climate change issues, some of which are complex, we must admit. Then enforcing compliance with national laws, the judiciary can effectively do that, and also harmonizing the existing laws with international rules, standards, and practice. This we can only do if we have the awareness, if we are sensitized about this issue, and also about the laws, international and best practices. And maybe the international instruments and all other laws, those who are not here, we should actually share with them, because this is a very important topic. Ladies and gentlemen, climate justice is a relatively new concept in Uganda. As I said, we don't know so much about it. Social and cultural barriers are majorly influenced by the ignorance of the reality of climate change and its impact on the livelihood of the people. Yet rural communities are greatly affected by climate change. I've just given you an example of water sources now being very far, the available water sources being very far from the residents if necessary. There are also institutional barriers due to the fact that government institutions are not systematically coordinated in the implementation of adaptation measures within their developmental projects. Let this workshop lay a foundation for climate justice jurisprudence through equipping the judicial officers with knowledge on climate change. I hope that we shall be able to discuss the relevant laws, share jurisprudence and experiences from other countries, and the best international practices, which will help us to understand and appreciate our role in addressing climate change issues and adjudication of climate change-related cases. There is need, for example, to strike a balance between national development and protection of the environment. It is important to develop and implement effective approaches for adjudicating climate change disputes at the national level. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I wish to thank the Heinrich Ball Foundation who funded this training, for it would not have been possible without their support. I would also like to thank Greenwatch and everyone who has participated in organizing the workshop. To you, the participants, I thank you for coming to attend this training amidst your busy schedules in your respective courts. I'm aware that judicial officers are very busy people, but I thank you that you have made time for this workshop. So with these remarks, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to declare this workshop open, and I wish you all fruitful deliberations. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
This is kind of my outline to the presentation. I'll run you through the international and national policy context. Then I'll try to explain what it is that is warming the world without so much going into the boring stuff. So what are we really doing about it as a country based on our differentiated responsibilities? And what can we do as individuals? Sounds quite easy and straightforward, but we'll see whether it's something that we can keep up with. And then I conclude. But I think the second most important one is to realize that yes, climate change is about numbers, but who should emit or who should pay, which cannot be settled by consensus, but can be settled by facts, scientific facts that are available. But I think the most important message I want you to take back, because of honorable justices, is that the biggest roadblocks that we encounter when we're talking about climate change generally is that the way it is framed. The justice framing are the biggest roadblocks that we have. I talked about who should pay. For example, it has issues about who should pay about to emit. It comes across again as something easy and straightforward to determine, but I think it's one of the most complicated things. Someone earlier had said we're just beginning to hear about this, but from the slide you can see it's over 20 years. 1992, that's the starting point. When the scientists and the global world realized there is a challenge that we are faced with our climate system. So we got together to put up an agreement that all countries agreed to sign and ratify. And by that it then means that we have obligations and commitments because we agreed and signed to what it was agreed at that point in time in 1992. So we have the Bali Action Plan. This is where the conversation started on how we now ensure that we limit temperature rise to well below 2 degrees centigrade. But as you can see, discussions take a lot of time between 1992 and 1995, and we come up with a new agreement, which I think it's very familiar to all of us, which is the Paris Agreement. Again, it is crafted in the same spirit and has the principles of the convention, but the only difference is that it breaks the bifurcated model of developed and developing countries, where it was very clear that as a developed country, you're supposed to do this, as developing, you're supposed to do this. Next. Okay, back to the convention, just in terms of asking myself questions and trying to answer them so that I avoid questions coming from you. The very first one, when I talk about the convention broadly, the question you'll ask about yourself, so what is the purpose of this convention and what does it set out to achieve? It's very easy as well. The purpose of the convention and any other argument that we may come up with in the courts is to help in stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that does not allow dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. We are entirely responsible for causing this climate change. The other one is that the emissions that we pump out through our daily activities are the ones that distort the climate system and thereby begin to be faced with the impacts that we are faced with. The same applies to the Kyoto Protocol. I talked about the binding targets that come between Annex A and Annex B countries, which was a good thing. Addressing the trajectory of emissions, but also addressing the trajectory of global GDP. That if we are to take an industrial path, as you will have seen in the previous years where we had historical responsibility, is that that's where the problem came from. That you're doing all sorts of activities that are increasing emissions in the atmosphere and then distorting the climate system. Then whose responsibility then is it to ensure that you fulfill both adaptation and mitigation? Because there are two framings to the response. It's either mitigation or adaptation, and I'll try to explain this. And whose rights should mitigation or adaptation uphold? I ask you a question, who should pay? Or who should even be allowed to meet respective capability? Now, from that very first principle alone, you can see it's heavily loaded with justice frames. And you can tell me, just by a show of hands, there are about 5 justice frames that are listed in there. You pick the easiest. Thank you very much. Equity. Thank you very much. The students, this is because I'm about to come and lecture in material for this thing. So can you? There are about 5. One lady justice has said equity. Now that comes out of very obvious. But there are 4 others.
The parties.
The parties, well done. Good attempt. I need the students because you should.
Collective responsibility.
Excellent. Collective responsibility. There are 3 others. There is also collective responsibility, but also common but differentiated responsibility. Because it points to you can do something, but you also don't do something. You can only do something within your own
to reduce deforestation and forest degradation,
and of course the respective
and
capability.
to promote conservation of forest carbon stocks,
But I think it
and
goes
also
even a
come
step
up
further.
with strategies. Some of the strategies Zeta has already shared with you, I need not to repeat.
Accordingly, the
But you
government
have
parties
probably
should take the lead.
climate smart agriculture.
Climate change and its adverse effects. You can immediately see that it provides steer of who should take lead in this process. We are not developed yet. But there are also countries that are not developed, and probably there will never be. I don't need an answer, that's just food for thought for us to think through as we go on next. This one I'll just spend half a minute because I don't want to waste so much time with this. It's about the so many conventions and protocols that we have signed and ratified. And this is actually what I did myself. I was privileged to do a master's in climate change in the University of Stanley, and I was trying to look at how policies relate to the actions of the ground. We have signed the UNFCCC, the convention in 1992 that I talked about. We have the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol was ratified, but if you look at the growth of emissions, it's been on an increasing trend. So the question you ask yourself, does climate policy work? I don't know whether it's a yes or no. So that's again good for you to think through. In fact, it will even be very good since we have the Paris Agreement. After 2020 or 2030, there will be an interesting study of how we have tried to address the emissions vis-a-vis what we are talking about. And that's why I say it's a bit complicated, because you see that far thing on the right. It's about burning fossil fuels. So the dilemma is, how do you turn this about, these two trajectories of global GDP and the emissions, which we know are responsible for distorting the climate system? Next. So, what are the justice dilemmas in this, from the different slides that I've presented? First and most, we should understand, as I said, there are two agreed basic responses, or in law speak, I can say duties. One, the mitigation one, which is simply put, the duty to cut down on activities which cause climate change. So, the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, has tried to bound around this complex issue around three ways. The first one, or is it about the country's historical emissions? This one, I'm sure we are now clear about it by now, because there's been historical responsibility, which unfortunately now is getting disaggregated. That because you were responsible for this from the 1900s, then you should carry the burden. This is how the convention tries to come up with some kind of balanced sharing of the mitigation burden. Polluter pays, that you are responsible, then you must pay. Ability to pay, but also common but differentiated responsibility. So if you recall the principle slide that I put here, it clearly speaks to these three. But still it also has its own complicated ways to navigate. Because how do you determine somebody's common but differentiated responsibility? How do you determine somebody's ability to pay? As we, especially if it's between developed and developing, so it's already skewed between poor country and rich country, so it can go either way. Next. So what are we really doing about this? This is a lot of text. I'll not read all of it. Problem I did, the graphic refused to run, but it was an illustration to show that we humans are directly responsible for this, and then we can do something. And I've talked about the two duties, mitigation and adaptation, and how we are trying to address it at international level through the various conventions that I enlisted at the beginning of my slides. Okay, so at international level, I've finished that. Now at national level, what we have signed and ratified the conventions and the treaties, which is a good thing, because sometimes you have to be a part of this movement so that you can attract a bit of resources to address some of the challenges that you have, because you're the most vulnerable person. So we've developed what we call the nationally determined contribution. Nationally determined contributions are merely carbon management plans. Carbon management plans, because that's how the debate is skewed, that each country has to try and put across what they're planning to do to reduce emissions. But as I said, we have to do this based on our common but differentiated responsibility. We don't have to commit to things that we cannot manage. So in this INC, it was done in good spirit, so that we try to limit temperature rise well below 2 degrees centigrade. We have highlighted interesting targets. Go to the next one. We have underscored and put across targets which are fairly, you can call nature-based solutions. And that's why we have the advantage. Nature-based solutions, because since the Paris Agreement and the Convention is skewed towards emission reductions, there are two clear ways to reduce emissions. If you don't abandon the fossil fuel trend, you'll either plant trees, because you know that trees attract the carbon, or you take the technology part, which technology that we do not have. There's what they call carbon capture and storage. Now that technology we don't have. That you take this and then go and dump it somewhere in the sea or whatever rocks that you have, and it will not be clear, but you don't have that. So what we posit in our NDCs are more or less nature-based solutions to reduce emissions, but also I think most importantly, improve individual livelihood and well-being. The first one is renewable energy generation. That we know that most of our deforestation, in part, is caused because people want access to energy. So our thinking is that if we increase the amount of electricity that we have, and this we committed to in the NDC, that we increase from the current about 1,800 megawatts as it was in 2014, because the service was developed in 2015, to about 3,200 megawatts of electricity, which we see as a good thing. The second one, we have an advantage over forestry. We know that there's been lots of degradation and it will continue to anyway. But we also know, as I told you, that trees play a significant part in sequestering carbon. So what we have advanced is that, okay, we can take advantage of our natural forests and try to do afforestation. To increase a bit of what it was about 9% as of 2014, for about 12% by 2030. So these are targets that we set ourselves to achieve. Another area where we have source of emissions is wetland degradation. So we've also tried to carve that one out and say, okay, since we know that the land area for wetlands in Uganda covers about 15% of the total land area. But what we have now is about 10%. Most of it is being degraded. So what we are putting forward is now we want to restore the wetlands to an agreeable or to what we were then, so that we also reduce, not just on the emissions actually, but we also know that part of the flooding that we are faced with is because people have settled in the wetlands. So you can see it comes in two ways. It has an advantage of emission reduction, but it also has an advantage of improving livelihood and individual well-being. Then there is another thing that we have indicated in terms of improving access to energy, especially for cooking. We know that the induction cookers are 40% more efficient than traditional ones. So if we take on this, it will improve our mother's health, but it will also ensure that at least they have food on the table because of the efficiency that comes along with this. Next slide. Okay, this is very obvious. If you read these other technical things that I've highlighted now, we do this just within ourselves. The climate change conversation actually is an energy revolution. But energy revolution, then it means we have to do everything possible to conserve the energy that we have, so that we don't engage in something that we can continue to disturb the climate system. So you need to make energy conservation a priority. These things that you see come out very obvious, but I think they're also very difficult. I had a Chinese lecturer in in England again, who told us a story about China. The Chinese minister went to England and he admired the roundabout system. We know the roundabout system. The main reason for the roundabout system, we know. It is not just for beauty, but it's supposed to solve the traffic problem. So when the Chinese minister went to England, he admired, and then he went back to China and instructed, can we have roundabouts in all the major cities? Thinking it will solve the traffic problem. Actually, China built the biggest roundabouts. If you've been to China, it has the biggest roundabouts in the world. So, with these roundabouts, the traffic problem was never solved. Part of the reason is that there are things that, if I'm 60 years now, there are things I've done in my life for the last 60 years. So bringing just a slight change between now, it will not be immediate. But for me, I'll down perhaps my emphasis here to use the roundabout appropriately to solve the problem that there is. Just like even if it was bought in Kampala, a taxi man will try to drive ahead of you, then there are also other impatient people. So ultimately, you end up with the same problem. The same applies to these things, that if you're not used to switching off lights, whether at your own home or even in office, it will stay with you. But it's not that you're to blame. We know what it is. So that's why it calls for enhancing internet communication. And that's the summary to my last, you can skip this. That's the summary to my last book. That's the summary to my last slide. That we can do something, putting the technical things aside, the simple things that we can do in our own capacities. Justice is a very honorable people. And I think there are things that so many people learn from you, just the same, so many things people learn from us. So if there's other things that you put into practice, it means that you're passing over some of this to that generation, for the one that will come after them, if they are not wiped away by climate change. But that's just to scare, so that we move along this together. So in short, I'm saying climate change response, even besides the technical aspects that I've highlighted, is a collective responsibility. And engagement back and forth, and engaging in these small discussions and among your peers, among the people who look up to you, can change people's mindsets, and in a very competitive way. So, honorable justices, I could have taken longer than I was expected. That's the end of my presentation. I wish to thank you so much.
In the able hands of Justice Kakuru, I was introduced to the subject, environmental law, and his first joke was, why are you struggling? Because that time I was working with public defender, where you defend the accused. And sometimes they come with cases like rape, and you are not going to be very interested. And, murder and all that kind of thing. So he said, why are you struggling with these people who even tell lies? Come and they take you to clients who will not even disturb you, but you'll be sure that you have served them. And I said, which kind of clients are those? And he said, the frogs. So, indeed, there's a precedent where I was swearing affidavits for chimpanzees, so it became an interesting subject, and I'm happy to be working with NEMA right now. But when you're on the other side, it feels a bit different. So the task I have today to discuss a subject that you've had quite complex, a bit of science or a lot of science in it, is not an easy task, but I would just sort of drive us home. That climate change, for instance, it says that it started in 1992. True, that is when the legislative framework started to formulate. But I think there is a deeper history to it, that environment matters have been a concern for a long time. And I think we had the initial declarations of 1972 that were basically discussing the nexus between humans and environment. Again, I am humbled to be addressing this forum when the person who introduced that subject is in this meeting, Justice Cornelia. She was the brain at that time in NEMA, and she ably also introduced the subject and content of environmental law. So I believe when the discussion emerges, there will be more people who can drive the issues home. So during that time, of course, there was appreciation of the fact that humans cannot continue to live without using the resources they have, and inevitably they are degrading them, they are affecting them, and therefore different impacts are emerging. And one of them is climate change. And climate change has been defined in our national law as the change in climate that is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. That is under Section 2 of the National Environment Act. Now the question is, have we been observing our climate? Probably not, and I think that's what the presenter was talking to. There's a lot of uncertainty about the subject when you relate or associate with it. And the fact that they scale it globally makes it so negligible, and yet it's a reality. When they speak about principles of common but differentiated responsibility, you appreciate the fact that you can actually look for an excuse, and that the degradation contributes to climate change is a factor to contend and live with. So together with the climate change, the UNFCCC, UNCCC, there were also other conventions that were agreed. There was the Convention on Biological Diversity, which speaks basically to everything that we eat, everything that contributes to life, the ecosystems. And then we also had the UN Convention on combating desertification. All those were speaking to aspects of the nature or natural resources so that they are not degraded to a level that would lead us to the climate change. Now, of course, when we are parties, we oblige, but there is a requirement for us to ratify and make our laws. So these have been domesticated largely in the National Environment Act, where there are several measures. But specific to this topic of climate change, it is under Section 69 of the National Environment Act, recently enacted. This act repealed the National Environment Act of 69. It provides that NEMA should work with the lead agency, and in this particular case, the lead agency is the Office of the Prime Minister, and other ministries follow. So we have to basically be reporting on this to the Office of the Prime Minister. That shows how important this matter is. And working with the lead agencies, we are supposed to guide on improving resilience of ecosystems but it cannot go to -1. But countries like Namibia, they will go, and they're on the African continent, they will go as low as 4, -4. And such conditions, we wouldn't want to have them. If you go to Namibia, you'll find that they don't really have grass. They don't really have trees. We are enviable. When people come to Uganda, they actually appreciate the green we have, the nature that we have. And that's the biodiversity. So we cannot risk without doing something. But we also appreciate the fact that what usually causes the clearing of land and opening up areas that would have conserved the environment and maybe protected us from climate change. It is the fact that people must utilize the resources they have. So the populations have expanded and they must settle. They also need the food, and it is an agriculture-driven economy. So the strategy for climate-smart agriculture is intended to look into that. And I think you've read in the papers, and I think there has been also media talk shows about the change in season and now promoting irrigation. But if the water will not be there, all those may not be realized. So we are trying to work within the law to see that that happens. Of course, there are also established principles, which some of them he mentioned, that we are guided to follow. These include like polluter pays, and the issue of precaution. For climate change, definitely precaution is key, because the science is not certain and data is not that much available. But the contentious activities that we engage in, which I know sometimes have brought us before you, is restoration. The idea behind restoration, which the presenter mentioned, is indeed to try and recover the degraded areas. And the science behind it is that we cannot wait until it is completely exhausted to do something. We have to make sure that that which avails us the environment, amidst other pressing needs, is conserved. So we've had contention where we are asking people to move. We've issued orders. Of course, our orders do not override the orders of court, and we continue, and I think we'll continue to appear before you in the spirit of restoration. But I must mention that restoration is supposed to be guided. There are established guidelines on how we should do it, and sometimes the people we engage maybe make mistakes there, but in principle, it is a good thing that should be done. While we may know what to do, the people on the ground may do something else. But bottom line is, when we are speaking to the principle of restoration, indeed it is basically to restore the degraded ecosystems. And I will speak specifically maybe to wetlands. When you read about wetlands, you'll find that they are very critical to moderation of the climate. And if destroyed, then the climate will change. You've had the heat waves, you've had the floods. All of these contribute to it, because of course the science is that when the wetland vegetation, they call it peat. The peat is able to absorb carbon. But if people destroy it or mine it or feed it, then definitely that function is lost. There are also other legislation that supports this, of course. We have the ozone depleting substances regulations. These are basically to reduce the circulation of such products. And these include fridges, we now have ACs. And while it is okay to be in this room, you should question what happens when the AC is empty or half empty and it is destroyed? That emission or the release of that substance in the AC or in a fridge is hazardous to the ozone layer, and that will contribute again other factors that will change the climate we have. So that responsibility is shared, as he ended in his discussion. It is not to NEMA alone, and I would remind us of Article 39 and Article 17J. That 39 gives us the right to a clean and healthy environment, but 17J gives us a duty to protect and enhance the environment for ourselves and the future generations. I wanted to also mention the fact that we have been, because this process or a process such as addressing climate change and coming up with programs that would enhance resilience requires a lot of funding, and our government, as you are aware, is constrained with resources. We receive some support from the UN, and currently there are several projects that we are implementing, but one of them that is very interesting is the one on waste to energy, where we are now trying to adopt technology that transforms biodegradable waste to emit biogas so that we can use it for the different things. So we are going to pilot that in several districts, and we think that that will also contribute towards mitigating climate change impacts. I beg to end here because I'm sure that the discussion will raise more issues, but I also see that in the handouts there are interesting compilation of cases, and these are very key in the folders. I find all the cases quite interesting, and one of them, the first one on Agenda Foundation versus the State of Netherlands. They said that the courts in the end held that the state had acted negligently towards agenda by starting from a reduction target of 25%. The question is, shouldn't we start anywhere? But maybe when we start, we affect other people. And why I pick on some of these cases is to show you that sometimes we are accused, and I'm not begging to defend myself, but that we have started with the most vulnerable, we should target the others. But we have to start somewhere, we have to work, and it doesn't seem like it's satisfying both the present and the future generation. Thank you. That is also done, being done. The issue of clean energy is expensive is a reality, but I think for some time now, even before I think Justice Cornelia crossed over, there had been a concept of schools which are largely dependent on energy, wood energy, and therefore they were encouraged to have woodlots, and the program was initiated as such. So these are now also being encouraged at household level or community level, so that we know that our people are not going to transform drastically. Electricity still hasn't reached some villages, but we think that such strategies become real. And now we encourage at district level to formulate bylaws which now mandate the communities to do the conservation and mitigation measures that could arise from that. Vacuum of information is a reality, my Lord, and I wish we have made a proposal to UNEP to support us in issuing publication and compiling information. Now that we have a new law, it is critical that we revamp the earlier. And I think the last time that we were distributing was the earlier times when there were the trainings for judicial officers and law enforcement officers.
Carbon dioxide, there's methane, there's nitrous oxide, and so on and so forth. And they come through those various sectors that we mentioned, which we posit in our NDC. So that is the starting bit. The other one, so the argument is, if we allow these gases to continue being pumped into the climate system, the energy balance is going to be distorted and thereby have too much rain, too little rain, or none at all. But that also has its own impact. So you see, it is a kind of trail. You start from one point where we are as Ministry of Water and Environment, and then there's another step where other agencies and institutions come in, like that, until we get to what we need to have as a country. You look at two things. What is the implication of that? And why is a country doing that? It is doing that because, one, it wants to increase its GDP, which is logical anyway. The country has to develop. So now we are introducing another complex and more complicated dilemma, is that for you to do that, you have to do it in a very sustainable and clean way. And that's why I talked about climate change being an energy revolution. So, the responses I highlight, some of them are experiments, and this links to what Justice Kapuru and Lady Justice Cornelius pointed out. If Justice Kapuru says he's been on a committee of licensing pollution, it is an experiment which is even done elsewhere. An experiment may not work. In Europe, they have what they call the cap and trade. I'm very sure this is what MEMA should have copied, to form a committee to license pollution. The cap and trade in Europe was that, okay, we set for each factory a cap beyond which they cannot emit. If you want to emit, you pay. So it was a good idea to stop pollution, but it doesn't work. We are in a capitalist world. So what actually turned out is that, different from what these guys did, is that the factories in Europe that have reached their cap, you go and talk to another factory X and you're allowed to omit. So the cycle continues. So in short, it hasn't helped to reach the intended goal, as it were. That's why we have, even the convention talks about it. I talked about planting trees. It's actually one of the most efficient ways, because afforestation captures carbon. That's why you have rich countries coming to our countries to support us in afforestation. But there's a downside to that. It's that, and that's why you have issues like carbon trading. That we are encouraged to plant the trees so that we can sequester carbon, so that you come and pay us. If we maintain that tree standing for another couple of years, because of the advantages that we know that accrue from it, to absorb the carbon. But it doesn't stop the European from continuing to emit, because they are paying you to plant trees so that. So, because emissions have no boundaries, so it's understandable that for you can go ahead, but then us will do sequester. But we have an advantage of that, because we have enormous forests, we have whatever forest reserves and everything else. We can allow regeneration, we can also promote afforestation. It's a good thing, you get a bit of money, but you also live in a clean environment, because we're not private to the technology that we require to absorb the emissions. On the issue of setting up a factory and begins polluting, who should be blamed, or should never come to do whatever? I think the little or so much I know about EIS is that they're actually supposed to make life impossible for developers. But if they do, they should meet the set and the standard criteria that there is. So my little knowledge about this, if somebody has, they truly acquired a license, I don't know how that now turns about in legal terms. Maybe my Sarah will try to explain. I don't know how it turns out, but if I have gotten something legally to do it, maybe the downside is, if there are standards that you've not met, then you're culpable. And I'm sure most of these, maybe they get the licenses, but they do not meet the set standards, which is a bit, maybe a weakness on our part on how we continuously do monitoring and reporting on what the different institutions are doing. On the issue of beliefs, this was from the moderator, Masu Serve, and talked about nature is leading us to believe that the world is coming to an end. President Trump likes saying, I'm one of those who follow him on Twitter, so he said he's trying to drain the swamps, but the swamps are fighting back. So I think what's happening is not because the world is coming to an end. What is happening is just because of what the kind of actions that we've done over time, occupying spaces where humans are not supposed to be. So that, and this relates a bit to what Justice Wawide talked about. The flooding in Kampala, it's kind of self-explanatory. Because I'll give just one example of, you know that whole stretch of Ntinda stretch and whatever? All that is the wetland, but it's been notified. But water will always find its own level. If it doesn't, then you'll face the consequences, because it is us that have gone to where water is supposed to be. And I think the kind of construction that has gone on is not the one that supports free flow of water. And that's where we have, in part, a bit of this mess.
The way that cases have been brought, you really feel that you should be on the other side, basically presenting the case and not necessarily defending, but then they have put you in the position of a defendant, and so you can only make such interjections. The other reason why we do not, for instance, come to the courts as the initiators of the suit is the fact that we have quasi-judicial powers to actually stop and issue orders. And those orders, if issued unfairly, would be contested in courts of law. So it becomes harder for us again to come to you and say, these people are not complying. Then it is another way of saying, we have failed to do our duty. Because grass then has a life and all that kind of thing, and maybe something could be there. And stepping on it, it cries and all that. There are people who are being passionate about it, and they have now put it in our law. They now put it in our law. So it's something that could come. Lastly, the issue of two issues here. The justice dilemmas, those who have been affected by the damage, and paying definitely is the chain of possession. I would think would apply. Although in many cases they feel government should pay, but I feel that the person who has caused the damage and should be able to pay. The issue of ability and inability, I think, is still a debate. Then Chitezi and EIA. We have a case, there is already precedent on it, where we had to pay costs as NEMA and then damages by KCCA. And I would say that it set good precedent. And in a way, the issue of liability, the caution and the monitoring aspect really, the regulatory and monitoring responsibility that we have. We've not had success in shifting the burden the other side, because there is another case also of Morris where the judge felt that we had in a way enabled the person who had caused the nuisance, because it's a garage operating. So again, the discussion is still continuing, but we hope that gradually the line can be drawn and the burden shifts to the other side, and our role is not so heavy. The concept of I think it was on towels, and I think he answered it, but it falls under the principle of sustainable development, which speaks to sustainable consumption patterns. Currently, we have what we call the Uganda Consumption Program, managed under UNBS, and it largely supports industries. Why? Because they're the ones that are trying to abstract water, and they're the ones they're meeting, so they are sort of teaching them on sustainable utilization and all that. So the concept goes on to the other industrial, but if you look at it, it's about the volume that you may have to abstract for you to run your business, and therefore they are reducing on it so that there is enough in the system to sustain the environment. Thank you so much.
The scientific, social, and economic issues relating to climate change have already been heavily set out by earlier presenters. They are the experts, and I need not say more. I will therefore restrict myself to the legal aspects of climate change as I understand them. Up to date, as far as human knowledge has been able to tell us, this blue planet in our solar system, in the Milky Way, that is the galaxy in which this solar system is the only place in the known universe that supports life. This is amazing, because the stars, the sun is just a star, it's not one of the big stars. But there are billions and billions of stars. And now we understand there could be billions of galaxies. Our own galaxy, the Milky Way, when you see in the sky, it's just like a haze. Light years to cross it. But in all those planets, in all those solar systems, there is no indication that there is any life elsewhere except here. It's not the sun that actually it's the earth that is heated and the heat is reflected. So many things that we alone have. Of course, there are theories. There could be the Big Bang theory, there are other theories of creation. But if you look at the Bible, and we also look at the theory of creation, they tally, because the Bible starts with the nothing, the earth, the universe, then the earth, then the land, then water, then life starts on land as plants, then animal life starts from water, and then goes to land as amphibians, then mammals, and then man. This theory of creation is actually an Egyptian theory of creation, because that was the science. And the theory of creation was scientific. The only issue is whether the earth was created, the life was created in 7 days, 6 days, or not. So time is relative. So what metaphorically the Bible refers to as 1 day could actually be 1 billion years or 500 billion years, but it is still 1 day in eternity. Because eternity, if you say world without end means time without end, and if there's time without end, then a day can be anything. It's a question of relativity. Reference, you can read the Hawkins' book, the history disasters. So it is like they say, it's an emergency. It is extremely critical. Are we at this point, like someone has said, the end of times? Is it the end of times? That we are going to do something that is irreversible and everything will go to reverse and that will be the end? And that will probably be the end. Is it so? Because if we believe, it's not that if we believe, we just see. Someone has just been talking about I think it's worship. Changes of climate change that have occurred naturally. Yes, they are climate change they occur naturally. But the patterns have changed, and science has shown us that the weather patterns today are not the natural ones. They are as a result of man-made activities. The earth has been described as one living organism in which each tiny part is essential for the continued existence of life on this planet. In this regard, therefore, our unique environment is key, not only the existence of mankind, but all other species. We do not want to be the generation that destroyed the earth. We know that concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere as of 2018 is the highest it has been in 3 million years. This is frightening considering that man evolved from Earth 4 million years ago. So, if you go back to even just Google climate change or anything, you'll see the warmest summers or the warmest winters have been in the last 20 years. The coldest winters have just been in this century. They all relate to the time from the Industrial Revolution up to now. And it is very simple. It's very simple because you know that energy is created by simple combustion. If you want to cook food, you have to heat it. If you have to heat it, you have to make a fire. If you have to make a fire, you have to have a fuel. And that fuel will burn and change and emit gas. Where people say wrongly that man invented fire. Of course, man did not invent fire. Fire occurs naturally. Lightning can cause fire, volcanoes cause fire, friction can cause fire. That's why forest fires just erupt. What man did was to harness it, ability to harness it, and later ability to make it by friction. Now, the advent of fire changed, ability to burn fire changed everything. It means the earth could burn in a way it was not envisaged to ever burn, because the fire was not occurring naturally. Where it was occurring naturally, it would be ignited. But here you have each one of us with ability to make fire every day, everywhere. And then in order to make fire, we need fuel. Now fuel has changed from firewood to charcoal to coal, now to oil. And you can now harness gas and burn it. All those things were never envisaged in our natural environment. I am one of those who think that the best thing that can happen to this world is extinction of man. That's the best thing that can ever happen. Then everything will be happy. The trees will grow, the animals will grow, the fish will have nobody to fish them, there will be no place to pollute. Chapels will now come to this big hotel and will be happy and produce snakes, will be happy. There will be no zoos of people capturing elephants and keeping them in captivity. Everything will be good. Okay, if God can leave a few people like the flood, if you could bring the flood and kill all of you, at least me and a few others, then the world would be happy. nature and how the absence of man. There is actually a film said a documentary about when there is no man or something like that. What happens when there is no man? Even when they were in that documentary was Chernobyl, a city in Russia, former Soviet Union, where there was a nuclear leak and they evacuated people from that area and nobody lives in that area because of high radiation. When they went back, life is thriving. They had animals, everything. So they thought radiation was going to kill them. No, radiation was not going to kill them. If radiation could kill only men, like the time of Noah. And I think if Noah's flood had not come, the world would have ended long ago, because now that also gave them time for the environment to recover. They say, for example, there's only one positive thing that came as a result of the insurgency in the north. The environment was left free. The grass grew, the trees, there were no people to disturb it. Yes, now the people are grabbing it to grow sugarcane and all sorts of other things. So the issue why I'm graphically putting this point is activity of man. The activity of man. Because development means and entails the harnessing of nature. Everything that we have, look at your mobile phone. Look at your mobile phone. That mobile phone is nothing but soil. Everything in that mobile phone was done from the soil. It is copper, it is tungsten, it is aluminium, it is glass. What you call glass is actually silicon, it is sand, it is plastic, which is fuel, which is oil, fossil oil, everything. Your computer, your perfume, everything, everything. Your wig, your shoes, everything is from nature. This house, Bush's helicopter, or Trump's aeroplane, everything is from here. But it is at a cost. It is at a cost. Therefore, why we have climate change here is the total impact. The total impact of climate change. When there was, how did oxygen come about? Because the plants, like I said, were the first to evolve life, the early life, plant life, algae, non-flowering plants. And they were using heat, then creating energy, then releasing oxygen and carbon dioxide. They would take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So the oxygen kept on growing, because now you have this cycle. You take in carbon, let's take in carbon dioxide, they release oxygen, and therefore quantities of oxygen were able to grow to the extent that they would support other forms of life. Now other forms of life, like us, breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Now you put combustion, and then it increases the carbon monoxide beyond what the earth or naturally would be able to emit and again absorb. So it becomes saturated. When it becomes saturated, it's like ladies, when your pressure cooker, or even a simple cooker, you just put a lid and all the heat goes back down. So we are just like in a pressure cooker, heating ourselves. And what we are saying is, let us reduce on the heat, let us reduce on the emission. We are not feeling it, people are saying we are not feeling it. There used to be a picture we used to use in environmental classes. If you put a frog in cold water and put heat down and heat the water slowly, the frog will not jump out. In fact, it will boil in that water because the heating is so slow and it is feeling good, but the heat is increasing, it doesn't know that it is increasing until it boils. On the other hand, if you boil water, bring a frog and put it, it will jump out. Immediately, it will jump out. So we are in that situation. We are not feeling the heat, but we are dying. We are not feeling the heat, but we are feeling the earth. Because Trump thinks there is no heat. Why? Because he's feeling warm in the middle of capitalism, because he has oil companies to protect, he has industries to protect, he thinks he should be more powerful than China, and he thinks he should leave the Paris Agreement. My Lord Justice Alexander has told us, and it is true, just 2 days ago, India's capital, New Delhi, was shut down due to pollution. Shut down. A public health emergency was declared. Schools were closed. Offices were closed. Airports were closed. And people were forced to put masks. Now, imagine that situation. And yesterday's paper had that picture of the Delhi without pollution and of Delhi with pollution. Where do you go if you can't go outside? Where do you go? Because fire you cannot forbid, water you cannot forbid. But now if there is pollution everywhere, what do you do? We had a seminar for Law Society in Barara sometime back when I was an advocate. And one of the participants was a young lady, I think she was a young mother, and she had been she was asthmatic, and she had been asthmatic all her life. So she goes to Barara for a workshop. We sit out, we had a cocktail or whatever, and she sat out. I was sitting next to her, and she told me, I don't know what is happening. I've never felt like this before. Because for me, in the evening, to be out here, I should be wheezing. I told her, no, it's pollution. Where did you grow up? She grew up here, you went to Kampala, some place. So she knows that is the natural air. The Kampala natural air is very polluted here. So she thought that is the, no. When you go to other places where there is no air pollution, you go to Fort Potro, you go to Bulu, you will, that's why Cecil Rhodes left England to South Africa. He was asthmatic. And because they were burning coal during industrial revolution, he was too sickly to live in England. They didn't know what the problem, they thought it was weather, it was pollution from. Then he was taken to South Africa, and he became okay. And that's how he put up that empire, took Rhodesia, the present Zimbabwe, the present Zambia, and started all this gold, diamond, and gold mines and the rest. But the only issue was environment. But now, if we pollute the whole earth, where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? And I can tell you this as Africans. Let me tell you, people will come and chase us from here. Yes, people with guns and power don't think that people who are chased out from Palestine were human beings like you. No, they were. Don't think that people who are being chased out of other lands, they were. Chinese will come and chase you, and people will not die of pollution when there is free air here and they are forced. They'll come and chase you. They don't chase you directly, they are going to buy the land, they'll buy the trees, they'll buy the forest, they'll come and chase you. This money you are getting from World Bank with first do this, don't cut trees, don't do this, don't do that. Is exactly that. This pollution which has closed down New Delhi is from industries, motor vehicles, construction sites, and burning of solid waste, and also burning of farmlands and forests. It's a combination of many things. My Lord Justice Justice Nkonge, you are asking about burning grass, the legislation to burning grass. That's very important legislation. But for you people who live in Kampala don't know that, because Kampala is around the Victoria, you have green and wetland. But for us who live in the cattle corridor, the dry season is longer and they are grasslands. So the people would burn. Fire would burn from the Antonde up to Barara without break, because it's just abandoned grassland. So it would just burn, and it will, because during the dry season people are preparing to plant. So when you don't have technology, the easiest way of preparing land for planting is to burn it. It's also a way for shifting cultivation. You cultivate here, the soil fertility reduces, you go to another place. The way to clear land, the first thing is to burn. So it was important that this, although others suggest that burning should have continued, because it was for pastoralists, it was a way of controlling ticks. It was a natural way of controlling ticks, because then all the ticks in all that land would burn, new grass would grow, the cows will start producing in September when there is fresh grass, and the cows will be able to grow without ticks having come. So everything, but also burning of grass produces fertility for soil. That's why people who plant trees, who plant these flowers, use like ash, what they have already done. Our own capital, Kampala, is no better than New Delhi. Its air quality is 6 times worse than the global standards. You can go to www.kcca.go.ug/news. The school that the toilet is full, we have closed it. Where do they go? Now you think yourself in your problem and say, this place is full, closed it. Yes, but there was no other waste disposal area for garbage. And once there was no licensed landfill or area for disposing of waste, then you cannot license the transporter for waste, because the transporter waste has to prove that the place where he's going to dump it is available and is licensed. You cannot license the people collecting garbage or storage, because they need to know where they're going to dispose of the garbage. So eventually the problem of Stesi had to be dealt with like that. We had to allow. So because there are practical aspects of that, but in the end it is just poor planning, very poor planning. But the good news is that there are solutions, both local and global, as already articulated by previous presenters. Control of human behavior and activities through legislation and education is one of the many solutions available. Hanging, the world assumed that capitalism is the way. It is not. The fact that it is dominant, it does not mean that it is progressive. When there was colonialism or slave trade, it was the dominant trade that made money, but and it was all for 400 years. Does that mean that slave trade was an advanced way of doing business? Of course not. At that time, the people who were doing slave trade were the powerful ones. Even the Pope, they asked the Pope, Mr. Pope, now, if we sell Africans, is it the sin? Are we going to go to heaven? And the Pope said, no, Africans don't have a soul. So if you sell them, you will go to heaven. Yes, because our morality, our laws, our thing, they follow the economics. They follow the economic base. That's why you see United States is moving moving away from the Paris Agreement because they want to revamp their economy. They cannot revamp their economy without setting more industries, polluting more. If they don't pollute more, the production becomes expensive because they are competing with China. If China can pollute and produce 1,000 cars, yet the industries in America are not required, are required to reduce emissions, therefore reduce energy, either invest in research and development, or have to do other things, then their products will become expensive. So that's why they do not want to change. The above is compounded with an environment in which extreme poverty prevails side by side with abundance and waste. I think there's more food that is wasted in developing countries that I think studies have shown that is capable of feeding all these other developed countries and their people. They just the waste. Why are there heaps and heaps of waste? Why? In your village, have you ever seen this? Everything is consumed. The cassava is consumed, the Hascome cassava is consumed by the goat. If you throw away matoke in the compound, the chicken will eat the matoke, then in the evening you will eat the chicken, and if you throw it away, the dog will eat the head. Whatever is left will be eaten by Karoli. The world has a way of cleaning itself of waste. That's why we have vultures, we have marab stock. How many people have you seen marab stock in your village home seated in your compound on top of your house? No. Marab stocks are here to collect waste for you. Council should pay them. that is their work. That's why we have scavengers, we have hyenas and jackals to eat the carcasses that have remained when made and so that the rest can be composed. Because you want Colgate. Do you know that the packet appears far bigger than actually the tube? You think it's big by this tube, you think it's this big. You open these ladies who buy perfumes, you get a packet, it's this big, you buy perfume, and a very small thing like this comes out. Is this the perfume? So everything is about packaging. Packaging is about marketing. Marketing is about competition. Competition is about prices. Prices is about profit. Profit is about selfish capitalism. Now, all of you here, you have staff. What you call staff? Especially you students, do you have staff? Staff. Staff are the things you... What is this you ask? I ask my daughters, what is this? It's my staff. What is your staff? This is my staff. But it's your staff. What is it doing in my house? There is nothing in the staff. There is just waste. I don't know what. And that's why they are going to work for every day, go to work. And every day I want to get a staff. Go and buy more staff. My staff. Now, one day they even have a clearance where they just to move. Or what they, these are my old staff. I no longer need the staff. Now I have to go. Yes, you have to go more staff. One of the problem we have is storage. Where to store? This stuff. So you need a big house because you have more staff. Anyway. In the end, you have filled the one. So human beings have filled the one with oceans are choking on stuff. Why don't you put a dispenser there and people can walk? Don't you have legs? Can you walk there and just get water from a dispenser? Do you need to get water in a mineral water bottle? This water bottle is not what is sold. This water here is free. Is free. The only thing we buy is the bottle. Yes. The cost of this water is only the bottle. The water is, it is free. Even if it is true that it is mineral water, then it is free. Are they paying anybody to? No. But even the cost of pumping it is subsidized by the cost of the bottle. You remove the bottle, there will be no business of water. That's the truth. In Kampala, a liter of milk, now the rainy season is about 300 shillings, but usually the average is 500 shillings. A liter, this one is half a liter. It is 1,000. So it is cheaper to make milk than in fact, it's cheaper to wash your hands with milk than to wash your hands with water. Distorted capitalism. It is. Courts have a duty to balance interests in between the industrialists and their consumers. They have a duty to educate about disputes arising between the poor seeking more arable land and the conservationists seeking to protect them and protect forests and wetlands. Courts may, through positive action, stop depletion of natural resources in our lakes. I have said this before. Why is the army on Lake? Why is the army on Lake Victoria? They are supposed to be in their barracks to somewhere else. Why are they doing on Lake Victoria? Beating fishermen, torturing them, and actually killing them. Why? Because of depletion of resources. Why are resources being depleted in Lake Victoria? Because they license factories from Busia all along the shores, and all this fish is freshwater fish is going to Europe, to the polluters' capitals. And for us here, they leave us with a skeleton called Mugogowas. Now, Mugogowas is the skeleton which Africans eat here. If you go this side, you will find that people, they have a business, they put them on the pickup. The head, the tail. And that's what our children eat. And that, of course, there's protein deficiency. So this is what we're talking about. We can say, stop. The science and the study has shown that only 3 factories of fish on Lake Victoria producing only these quantities can be licensed in order for us to sustainably keep the stocks of fish on Lake Victoria. You may, however many fishermen you kill, it's not going to solve the problem because their fish is free. The only thing I need to do is to go there, get that fish, but I won't get the mature fish because all the mature fish is being sold to the factories here in Europe. Courts have to constantly adjudicate positively on all issues arising from pressure and urbanization. Courts in Uganda have done so in the past and they are encouraged to do so even more now and in the future. In Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment versus Attorney General and NEMA, Justice Opio Aweri, J, as he then was, declared null and void a forest permit issued over Utamira Forest to Kachira Sugar Works for the purpose of cutting down the forest and growing sugarcane. He upheld the doctrine of public trust and found that it applies in our jurisprudence. In Greenwich versus Uganda Wildlife Authority, Justice Tiginoni granted Greenwich standing to keep chimpanzees in their natural habitat. In Nyakanda versus Attorney General, the Supreme Court confirmed the decision of the Constitutional Court in which it dismissed the petitioner's claim to build in a wetland in Kampala. In the Environment Action Network versus Attorney General and NEMA, Justice Itamoa PJ upheld the right of citizens of Uganda to live in a clean and healthy environment, including freedom to a tobacco-free environment. Climate change brings with it new legal challenges. Increasingly around the globe, lawyers and civil society organizations are bringing to court climate change actions intended to expand the jurisdictions of court as a tool to protect the environment and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Most of the actions are against polluting industries. like Justice Cornelia was saying, you are going to find many people bringing actions against one or against other factories. Small factories are going to come. We are talking about Guangzhou. Guangzhou is a very recent city. Yeah, I went to China in 1993. Guangzhou was being built. It was being built. There was no city. They just built it. Climate change litigation is a tool that has the capacity to influence government policy and legislation. It also has the potential to influence corporate behavior towards self-regulation and voluntary compliance. Without judicial interventions, laws are likely to remain only on statute books. Vigorous enforcement is key in addressing climate change. Public interest litigation is also a key tool in the enforcement of existing and future legislation. Judicial intervention is likely to influence positive change in present institutional and legal framework. For example, judicial intervention may help accelerate the enactment of climate change legislation in Uganda. Such a law already exists in Kenya. Kenya has a climate change act already. Courts have the duty to enforce compliance by punishing offenders. You know, Kenya was always following us in legislation. We passed this, they also copied us. We passed NEMA Act, they also passed theirs. But now they have overtaken us. And even their constitution, they were xeroxing from ours. But they ended up with a very good constitution that is a gold mine for judicial activism and civil society activists that want to expand democratic space. So I think we should also start copying from them, since they have, in a few cases, some of which I don't want to mention, they have saved the best. These cases also help expose judges and judicial officers to climate change science and related arguments on either side. Well-reasoned judgments advancing the cause of environment and reduction of greenhouse gases will make offending companies think twice, as non-compliance will increase the risk of punitive damages and fines and will therefore influence their decision-making. You can see the case of Greenwich versus HEMA, when the cement industry was polluting, a lot of air pollution, 80 tons of cement and dust were being emitted every day in the atmosphere. But following a suit, a compliance agreement was entered between the company and the plaintiffs, and that stopped. I am told, reliably informed, that the pollution has begun again. Climate change has brought with it again challenges. Some of these questions that you would have to face relate, for example, to ownership of land affected by extreme weather, such as drought and floods, that remain uninhabited, for example, for a long time. If people shift from one part of the country because of floods and go to another, and they are there for 5 years, when they come back, do they claim that land, or it ceases to be theirs? If they leave the land because of drought and people are moved from area, but the right example is Bududa. People are there in Bududa, they have been relocated to a new place. They got, now who owns now the other land where they left? People say they are our ancestors' graves, they were our houses, you have taken us to a new place. What is the issue of ownership? Have they forfeited their land to the state because they have been resettled? After the issues have been settled in Bududa, can they bring them back and say, now, time up, you have been here for 20 years, you go back to Bududa? That's one scenario. The other scenario is what is happening actually A live example is in Barara on Masaka Barara Road. Because of floods, of heavy climate change, a lot of rain falls within a very short time.
So you get a lot of water.
And what were previously just a dry lowland became a wetland, then a small lake. It is now called Ahakayaj. And it is a name even on the road.
It is a new name that it is now
On the lake. But that lake was never there. And now it is in someone's farm. Now what happens to his title? Does it fall now under the wetland? Can the wetland division come and gazette it? If they gazette it, will they give you compensation? Now, during the dry season, people are moving from the other side where there was no water to now this lake. Is that trespass? Can you stop them? Because this is my land. It's God gave me. I prayed hard to God, and God gave me water.
now for you if you didn't pray.
And God punished you by not giving you. Can you come now and
Take my water.
or not?
Too much.
Or not? But
The most interesting one I've said it,
before is where there was
landslide in Bududa.
and a big chunk of land slid down with eucalyptus trees
And the base garden.
from the upper part to the lower part. Now the lower person came and started harvesting the maize. Now they are saying, this is my maize. I said, no, which maize? Your land is up there. This one there. This one is right there. Even the forest, just like how God can give manna from heaven. God gave the man forest at night. In the morning when he woke up, he had the forest, he also had a maize garden. Now, that case definitely is going to result in murder, is going to result in assault cases, is going to result in many issues. Now, when the matter comes to you as a judge in a criminal case over murder, what do? Do you look at this and go to Women versus DPP? I don't know which other cases you still use
But versus
historical versus Uganda. Those things don't apply. Look at this person. He has a genuine case. This is not murder. This is probably manslaughter. Oh, because he had come. He had come to get his base. And a quarrel ensued as to who owned the base. Which quarrel even the court has not been able to resolve. Now, and then those are many, especially in the cattle corridor, where people have vast herds of cows.
the resources the water.
Is an issue. In fact, I think there were cases recently in Yantoni involving a land of a minister, because I think maybe he had more grass there, keeping fewer cows, but the other people would go and take the cows at night. Then cows were confiscated. Even this case of Wamgani, I sat on that case at the Court of Appeal. It was exactly that. Cows moving from one neighbor to the other, this one confiscating them, this one coming at night to retrieve his cows. A fight ensued, a person is killed, and is charged with murder. 36. But they have to be looked at as conflict over natural resources. And say in the judgment that this is an issue of conflict over natural resources. It is different from a person who murders another on the border here in Kampala to just take money, or murders a woman because he wants to take her mobile money. She's a mobile money trader. And you sit in the same session, you decide the same cases, and you give the same punishment for murder, and you cite, I don't know what, on account of, you cite, no, this is, but sentencing is a discretion. You can convict, but sentencing is a discretion. These are mitigating factors. These are mitigating factors. It's not the same as the other one. You You may even convict of murder and sentence him to 3 years. It is a question of how you consider the mitigating, the mitigating and aggravating factors. Of course, it will come to you in the commercial court over whether you should, one industry should be shut down or not. Is it a commercial dispute or is it a civil dispute? If a factory is shut down, a dispute between NEMA and that. And I don't think there's a court that will not have climate change issues. Even family issues. They have climate change. Whether it is very hot at night or it is very cold in the morning. Whether the wife, the husband in a very cold bed, you can consider. But seriously. Or whether you give him land, when you are separating property, whether you give the land in the wetland or the other one on the hill, all those issues are there. We cannot avoid them. In all courts, which other court is here which I have not talked about? Corruption. The movement of people from Bududa who ate the money from Mamad in Bududa. Who said that? These people went Shigadogo. What happened to the paradams that could not be seen by scientists? They brought paradams, they were supposed to be done, but only scientists could. There is no court that you will not find climate change issues at any level. Defilement is a climate change issue. Yes, because grandchildren are leaving school to go and fetch water and collect firewood. They are always roaming in the village. The boys go to collect food for them. Like example, in my own land, Lake Mburo National Park, in the 7th National Park, Katonga Game Reserve. Do you remember that when the president made a directive that Australians should be allowed to Katonga Game Reserve? Can the presidential directive override a law? Because now you have a law, but you can't keep changing it every season. Yes. And you can't keep changing it according to the climate change. So the law protecting the game reserve says nobody shall enter, or it's a criminal offense for anybody to enter or to bring cattle in a game reserve. Here there is drought. The only source of water is in the game reserve. It is in Lake Mburo or it's in Lake, is in River Katonga. The people will take their cows there. They take them there, they are arrested. They are arrested, they cry. The RBC asks, what do I do? The president says, allow them. Now they should put a law that says, except as directed by the president. Or the president may, as by regulation or decree, allow temporarily, or the minister in charge of environment shall temporarily, upon application or where the need arises, allow people to move. You know, there has to be a provision within the law which does that. Now the reverse is also true. Animals from Lake Mburo, they go to people's farms when there is less pasture on the other side. The same with the other national parks that we have. Now, if I think you heard recently that lions were killed, 9 of them, because they had moved out of the national park and they were killing domestic animals, cows, and the people had to retaliate, they killed the lions. So that's a serious issue. It's a very serious issue. Is government liable for failure to implement obligations in international agreements? For example, Who is liable when children, you have seen children with water up to here, trying to go through a flood from school. This flood takes a child, or even a person. I think there was a woman who was washed away from her car or something here in Kampala after a flood. Who is liable if the government has not complied with its obligations? Because for me, I am on mitigation. I am on mitigation and issues arising from mitigation. We owe it ourselves and the citizens of this world. We owe it those from whom we inherited this beautiful place. We owe it to our children and their children, to those yet unborn. The time to act, my lords, your worships, ladies and gentlemen, is now, for tomorrow may be too late. Let us not consider our individual contributions to be insufficient or insignificant to make any meaningful impact. Every positive action counts. Nothing is too small or insignificant. The ocean is but a collection of single drops.
To know the kind of precedents that have been set, Justice Kapuru went through several cases that have been relayed by the different courts. But again here, I think what Justice Kapuru, very unlike his character, did is he did not give us the bad judgments, the bad precedents. I think for environmental law, do they provide a better medium for environmental protection or not? And then you have to go through the whole check of, are we signatories? Or if you're not signatories, can we apply it as customary international law or its good intentions under the Constitution? So I think these are all very important aspects to consider when we are looking at the law. One other aspect that came in is, I think we need to know the nature of obligations of the state for environmental protection. From the international system, regional, and down to the domestic level, the obligations on the state are clear. I think we need to appraise ourselves on how to assess duties and obligations of the state in regard to environmental law. But we also need to be mindful that there are also obligations and duties on the citizens, the public, the you and me, outside us being in the courts. What are your duties to environmental protection? What are your duties in the context of climate change that we all seem to be learning is a big elephant challenging us today? What are your obligations? Isn't it your responsibility to avoid throwing Buvera everywhere? Is it your responsibility to be mindful of things like maybe what do we eat? What is this white stuff on the eggplant and green peppers and tomatoes that we get from the markets today? Don't we have that level of obligation as educated members of society to cause some kind of change through reporting to relevant authorities? Or do we just accept the status quo that we have now, and then we read about stories of, there's a recent research, I don't know if people saw it, we said tomatoes in Kampala are contaminated. All the tomatoes in the markets are contaminated. So it takes you back. We see the white stuff on the tomatoes we get from for our salad, we eat it raw. What are we eating? We should, I think, get out of our comfort zones and start questioning these things and bringing the relevant authorities to do the checks. Recently there was a mass immunization drive, and a lot of my friends were saying, no, we don't have to immunize, you know. And then a doctor friend of mine who was active in it was sending posts on a class group, and she was saying, people, you should immunize. And so I wrote to her privately and said, you see, the problem is not that people don't know the value of immunization. It is what has become associated with vaccinations being laced with poison to kill Africans. You've read these things. Some people talk of the AIDS virus, some people talk of the vaccinations they bring, making women barren. And then amidst that, you see posts of Kenyan women in certain villages marching, demonstrating in the streets, saying they want men to get them pregnant. And when you read up more on that story, have you seen these stories? They say some of the women, when they trace them, they are from particular areas, and that particular age group was vaccinated. You know, like if the polio vaccine is on the left, they were given polio vaccines on the right, yet they had already received polio vaccines. There were booster vaccines like the ones we were having. And you know, you begin to think maybe there's something in these things. So I was trying to tell my daughter friend, it's not that people don't understand or are averse to the importance of vaccinations. Vaccinations are important, but the world has become so suspect. And the detractors come in different nice ways. Their packaging is different, you know? So we need to think outside our comfort zones. We need to be more questioning of these things. So I asked this friend of mine, what is so difficult with the Ministry of Health taking these samples and checking them on their own? You know, like if that's the suspicion, why don't we check these vaccines so that we know that we are really safe and demonstrate to the citizenry that these checks have actually been done. Don't just demonstrate that you're in bed with World Health Organization and yet people say those behind it are working with World. You know, there are those suspicions. What am I saying? We need to think, use our education to question the status quo or whatever is being presented. Because things are suspect. I don't think things are as innocent as they used to be many years ago. And that is part of the context of our obligations as the citizens. We need to be alive. On the law applicable, what is the law? What are the new laws? What are the regional, international conventions? What do they say? Sometimes it's hard, but there are things like the Kyoto Protocol that has been around for long, but how many of us know it? Now we have a new national environmental law of 2019. Have we looked at the provisions to know how to evaluate the evidence when it comes before us, so the different cases? The NEMA Act. What is the role of NEMA? The UN Convention on Combating Desertification. What do these acts and conventions provide, and how can we use them in our judgments? And then, what kind of remedies do we give when these cases come before us? Are they meaningful remedies for environmental protection? Do we give meaningful remedies? Do we assess the context of the cases before us so that we take account of all the factors? Justice Kapul was talking of mitigation, but for me I think sometimes if it's a criminal case, even before you get to conviction, we need to have a clear understanding of the different factors that come into play. In the civil suits, determining rights, land division, I think we should be mindful of the context, especially where it has to do with addressing a particular problem at hand. Maybe Justice Kakuru was holding the microphone better than me. So we should try and give remedies in our judgments that address the problems and issues at hand. There should be remedies that are relevant to the situation at hand. We need to understand the role of regulators. What is the role of NEMA? You know, in the civil division, there are many of these cases where people bring them against different people, and you have to cause them to to add NEMA as a defendant, and then in many others they add NEMA. But what is NEMA's role? Why do we keep adding NEMA for pollution cases? Part of it is because they're the regulator, they're the ones supposed to be. But then the other question is, if these cases are so many, what is NEMA doing wrong or right? And we don't raise this in a way of blaming NEMA, but understanding that we all have a part to play. And therefore the role, therefore, for you as the court is, how do you present it to NEMA so that NEMA does its job right in future? I think we need to pay attention to detail. We all, for example, might love eating braai, having parties at home, and that man that you bring to your house to do the braai is always bringing a sack of charcoal. Roasted meat. Does the roast whatever you want on charcoal. But imagine if we are having braai, someone is having a braai every weekend. That's charcoal. But what are we doing to the environment when we are using all this charcoal? Or we love our food done on the charcoal stove. What is the effect? What am I saying? Let's get out of our comfort zones in trying to do the right thing for the environment. Because charcoal, they burn down some tree, some forest, it's going to affect the rain, it's going to affect, it's a cyclic effect. So you enjoy your roast, which is done by charcoal, and that means there is a tree that's cut, and for the consistency of your charcoal use, there are trees that are cut. It's going to affect the rainforests, rainfall, it has a cyclic effect, and not just charcoal, but I think we need to check ourselves for us to make that small contribution, that drop that Justice Kakuru talks about, to make things better. Now, I think as judges, there's a need from the presentation. We need continuous training, and I think this is a good step. We should continue with the training. So maybe at this point we should thank the organizers of this training, but also, like Oliver Twist asking for some more, we need it to be continuous so that we keep learning and getting abreast. Compilations of the different laws that we need to use and rely on for environmental cases would also be helpful. So I think the role of the judiciary is a very, very important one in matters of the environment, and we as the judiciary should take it on with gusto. It is a very, very vital role. We cannot underscore it. It is very important. And the change that we're advocating starts with mindset change. We need to change our mindsets. We need to separate politics from the real issues when cases come before us in order to do justice. I think there's also to understand the role of public interest litigation in matters of the environment. Now, from my experience in the courts, a case can be brought straightforward, it's a public interest litigation, and they present it as a public interest litigation. But there are cases that come as individual cases, but they are public interest litigation cases, really, because of their nature. So, when determining these cases, what kind of remedies do we give? You could give remedies in individual cases that have the effect of reforms so that there is change to prevent other cases being brought. And I guess that can be a good thing. So we have to understand the nature of public interest litigation, whether brought as public interest cases or individual cases that have the effect of public interest. Now, Justice Kakuru talked of balancing rights between industrialists and individuals, the public. It could be balancing rights of individuals versus companies and private actors. It could be balancing public interests and business interests. Whatever the balancing you have, because yes, in courts we always have that balancing of rights. I think there should be the base minimum below which we do not go for purposes of environmental protection. There should be that base threshold below which is unacceptable. That base below which everybody must be put up. And it might sound theoretical, but there are cases that come to court and industries have been set up and they're manufacturing and they've never had an environmental impact assessment from NEMA. And they've been in operation for years. Never ever checked in with NEMA, and then the only time they come in is where they're polluting a residential area. So these people have talked to them and talked and talked. It has led nowhere. They finally come to court. But there's never been an environmental impact assessment. And sometimes even when NEMA has called them or said you have to do this report by this, they've not followed up and they're just going on and on and on. How do you come down on the industry? How do you work with NEMA to ensure things are done right? So that balancing of rights, whenever we have it, we should have the base below which is clearly unacceptable. And this can be founded in law, the base threshold that's provided by the law. It could be the base for protection of the public, the wider public. You have to have a standard in your discretion of assessment. What is your base minimum? Now, we cannot deny climate change is relatively a recent topic. It's a topic of recent years, and cannot claim to know everything about climate change. And my attempts at climate change have shown me that we need to think outside the box in dealing with issues of climate change. And the issues of climate change will not wait for the right laws to come in place for climate change. The matters are going to come to our desks. How are we going to handle them? Are we aware of international regimes, regional regimes dealing with climate change? How are we going to handle these climate change matters? If we are stuck in the penal code, if we are stuck in the CPA, if you are stuck in the MCA, I think we need to broaden our perspectives for the new trends concerning climate change. And this calls for keeping abreast of issues and trends regarding climate change and other environmental matters. Here I wish to draw your attention to some of the things I feel are striking in terms of trends and how that need to understand how different jurisdictions handle these matters. I don't know if we know of sand mining in Uganda. It is said that our sand is very, very high quality. It is used to make glass, and it used to make glass. So you find Chinese companies come, mine sand. Now what you see on TV is so little, because I try to follow this up. They literally bring large ships and they take sand from our lakes. So I don't know if you saw that clip where, was it an MP or someone was trying to bring regulators and all that to arrest people who were doing sand mining and all of that, and the Chinese were literally fighting. I'm beating up someone like an MP, and then all the journalists would not help. They were all, and the man kept saying, help me, it's our natural resources. Nobody was helping. The journalists were like, we're just doing our job of covering it. But it's because, and the Chinese could have the audacity to beat. They were beating, was it an MP or a local authority official? Yes, but it is because they are high stakes. When I try to find out the story behind it, is they literally bring ships. When I talk of ships, it's not ships bigger than this hall, to mine sand from Uganda, and they take it to China to produce whatever they have to. But what is that going to have on our environment? Our lakes? But all these things are this is going on in our backyards, and we do not know what exactly. We all know, there is Dansene's story. I'm sure it's Dansene's season, and many people love to Dansene. But there's also talk that in order to get big yields of Dansene's, there's some chemical that they put either on the iron sheets or something. I think we need those regulators to keep checking these things. It can't be individuals keeping on trying to check. You can't do a good job. We need the relevant regulators to keep checking these things so that we are assured of our safety in whatever we do. And when I talk of Dansene's, it's almost everything. I told you about the tomatoes. We see the white stuff, but do we bother to check? I don't know if many of us know about the Monsanto company, which is connected to Baylor. But what do we know? Do you know that Monsanto is in Uganda? Do you know that Monsanto is in the large-scale production areas in Mbale, in Lira, large-scale farming areas? Giving them seeds, GMOs, yes, genetically modified. So we are busy peddling a GMO bill in Parliament. But Monsanto has been in the upcountry farms, by the way, buying them. And large scale. And this is what trickles down to Kampala. What comes down to Kampala is so little. But most of the production is from upcountry. If you get up in the morning, you see the trucks that bring in all this produce into the markets. They come from upcountry. But who checks these things to be sure we are safe? Who checks to be sure the environment is not being abused through the production of these products? Or have companies like Monsanto, Bain and Lord taken advantage of our weak systems and weak checks and balances to come and take advantage of our country? By the time we wake up, shall we have anything left to protect? So these are issues we need to concern ourselves with. The pollution in Delhi that Justice Kapuru talked about, some years ago it happened in China. So it's real, it can happen here if you don't do the checks and balances. In Dubai, when their heat waves come, it's really, really, really bad. And they have the money. So, recently, I was in Dubai, it was summer. At around 4-ish, 5, when the heat is too much, there's a superficial cloudy thing that comes up above Dubai. And I'm like, but in this desert, it's summer, why that cloud? So I kept on asking, and then it was explained to me that they have developed artificial clouds to cool. Can you stop to think what that does to the environment? So I kept on asking, it bothered me. And then they say, but they don't do it much these days because the meteorologists, the experts they brought in said, we have to stop this thing because You know, everything in Dubai is a creation. It's a desert on its own. They said, given what it is and how it's all flat, that the day the rains come badly, it can sweep away the whole of Dubai. So they had to start cutting back, and they were being told to stop that. But just imagine what goes in the process of creating artificial clouds over a city. Isn't that pollution? Because the reason I'm saying this is, in our kind of countries, we tend to just bring in things from other places. Somebody can easily come. In Dubai, they have this solution. We need to start to question the things that are being brought to us, the things that are being, whether imposed or otherwise, availed to us, however sweet and packaged and nicely presented they are. The other aspect that came to my mind is we need to play safe. We all know that Ken Saro-Wiwa case in Nigeria, shale and oil exploitation, people were complaining about their village being destroyed. Ken Saro-Wiwa was the one at the forefront reporting this story. It just became synonymous with Ken Saro-Wiwa, and he was killed eventually. He died, okay. And this brings me to my last point. While we have to mind our safety in the way we do these things, there's also the issue of the corruption. We need to know the companies behind this pollution, because it's for their interests, the capitalist theory that Justice Kakuru presented, have big money, and that brings in the issue of corruption. They are big money industries. You talk of Monsanto, you talk of whichever way, the oil companies, talk of pollution, there is always a big money company. They are willing to pay any kind of money for their business to survive. And then corruption comes in. When these cases are coming in, they have all this money to throw around. So things can easily get sacrificed. But maybe we have to stand up to our role as the judiciary, because it means we have a duty, the duty that Justice Kakuru described in the end. We have a duty to protect what we inherited. We have a duty to protect it for our children and their children, and to protect the earth for those who are not yet born. It would be a bad thing if we gave way for the earth to be destroyed just because of those different challenges. I think we should all make a small contribution, and as judiciary, we should understand our big role in using legislation and putting judgments forth that actually enhance protection of the environment. Thank you very much.
For your presentations. And for me, a wake-up call and a call to action. So it triggered me thinking about, reflecting on the issues of climate change and environment, the way you put them. And I recalled something. I mean, how many of you here eat Cadbury chocolate? Just by show of hands. Cadbury chocolate. So I called something and I quickly Googled it. I thought I would share this and then out there. So the maker of Cadbury chocolate was Oreo biscuits and Ritz crackers is accused of destroying thousands of hectares of orangutan habitat in just 2 years of palm oil. This is in 2018. So then I go down. The new investigation carried out through Mapping Indonesia discovered that between 2015 and 2017, 22 of the company's palm oil suppliers cleared at least 70,000 hectares of rainforest, an area bigger than the city of Chicago, where Mondelez is based. Now, I brought it close home, and I recall that we got lots of palm oil trees somewhere in the country that also, cleared lots of oil. Then we had the issue of Bujagali Then we've got lots of investors from the Far East who are reclaiming or destroying lots of wetlands to put up, factories that manufacture plastic shoes and stuff. What is my role? What would be my role as a judge? Where do I come in? How can I make a contribution to either stemming the escalation of this or supporting whichever way I want to do? And in my mind, I say perhaps my interventions are limited as a judge to waiting for these matters to come before me. There might be other ways I can make interventions. But then I wondered why. We read about it in the papers, and the challenge now goes to the activists and other entities like Greenwatch who are involved in this. Usually, where it's after approvals have been given to do certain things like growing these palm oil trees, like putting up Bujagali, like investments in the wetland of factories that make plastics, like Monsanto farms in the northern region. So perhaps my call would be to the entities that play the role before the matters come to my courthouse, my courtroom, to go a step beyond putting this out in the media to enter into the courtroom for me to make or for us to be able to play a role. That's just what I want to share. I said, where is my role? My role is only perhaps to a great extent in the courthouse, in the courtroom. And who else out there can bring it to me? It's the other entities like our colleagues who have called us here, who have done a good job at it, of course, as well. But perhaps there are other entities out there who can bring this to us to make a contribution.
Now you realize that these realities are with us and that climate change is an everyday thing. So come with me and just look at a woman. I am the strong woman on the panel, and we have very many strong women out there in this country that are dealing with the realities of climate change. And I'd like to bring that perspective in this room, especially so because one of the Lady Justices, Lady Justice Damali, I think did tell us that once you move to the level of just judge, you do not have the opportunity sometimes to interact with these realities. So let's talk about food, for example. Our country depends on agriculture. The economy dependent on agriculture, livelihoods are dependent on agriculture. And so you know that most of the agriculture is done by the women. And so climate change, as has been presented very eloquently by the previous speakers, and I really enjoyed Justice Kakuru's session because he presented the realities of it all, has made the uncertainties a reality to the farmers. So let's walk away from the extreme events and just talk about growing food. So what climate change has done and we're experiencing right now is that it has shifted the seasons. And they've not shifted in the sense that they have moved from February to March, but they have shifted in the sense of uncertainty. Where 30 years ago we expected the rains by 15th February for the first season, now we cannot know whether in February we will have rain. This year in particular, the rain came in April after a very intense drought. Now, to a woman who puts food on the table, that is a very significant reality. It means that the crops will fail, and it means that that investment in the seed that went into the soil is lost. And for women in the villages, that is significant. It's a significant loss, which means that they now need to start looking outside themselves and their families for food. I think for me that is already dehumanizing, that as a breadwinner, you now have to beg or ask somebody to provide food for you. And if everyone of us here has capacity to deal with the impacts of climate change that we're experiencing now. Because you probably will be thinking, oh, if the rain was very intense, there's going to be a flood in Kampala. How do I navigate that flood? In my car. For the woman who is growing food, it means that the crop that is in the soil, which is her hope for food, is very likely to die. And that means the hope for food has died. So, yes, climate change is a very significant reality, and the science tells us that climate change is exacerbating poverty. And exactly how is it doing it for that woman? Thank you, I hope this will work better. So, she is looking out for food for the next meal, but the options that come include the situation is going to be worse. She will also, again, away from food, there's preparing the food. And we have been told that deforestation for our country is one of the largest contributors to our greenhouse gases in Uganda. And so forests have gone down. The source of energy has become even harder to find today. Now, the science is telling us that right now the impacts that we are dealing with of climate change are a result of emissions that were turned into the atmosphere over 2 decades ago. If you remember Mr. Boknatifu's presentation on the emissions curve, it showed that since the year 2000, the emissions have been rising with a very steep curve. It means that all those emissions from, say, the year 1990 until now are going to create impacts which are worse for our children and the children of our children in the next year. So, with the temperatures expected to hit 1.5 degrees C by 2030, the impacts are going to be way graver than we are experiencing today. So I'd like to invite you to yes, as you have already talked with yourselves, to think more deeply about this issue as you address the issues that come to your desks. I have interacted with a woman in Palisa, and this was way back in the year 2012. And at the time, they were having issues with food security because of a drought. And she cast a very sad story that because she had to feed the family and she had run out of options, she put the worst thing on the table for her husband to see it and wake up to the reality to support her, to bring food on the table. And she just served him, I'm sorry to say, but she served him shit. And so that was way back. But that tells you that issues of domestic violence are going to become a lot more as we experience more of these extreme events. But don't also forget that the slow onset events of these shifts in the seasons are equally impacting on the social dimensions of the societies we live in. And I want to agree with the submission earlier that even rape cases can be related to climate change. I do agree entirely because the pressures the communities are feeling, we have interacted with people who say that, I mean, if we are dealing with a drought of 4, 5, 6 months, and these are farming communities, what is there for them to do? So the men engage more in sex. Them marital sex, fine, but they also engage in rape. And you know better than we do that is a significant issue in the society which is not well addressed. So I'd like to stop there for now, and I'll take some questions perhaps.
The climate has changed, as you have been informed by the panelists. But how has it changed in Uganda? Science is based on projections. You see, that is the reality, because we don't know what will happen in 200 years to come. Sorry. But on the current projections, which have been done by Makerere University Climate Change Research Center, together with the Climate Change Department, the reality is the rains have not changed so much in terms of quantity, but what has changed is the frequency and the distribution. It's only the temperatures which have increased, and they have increased slightly. They have increased to a magnitude of around 0.2 for the last half a century. Now, when you present these science facts, people tend not to want to associate with them, and this is one of the challenges when it comes to legislating climate. How do you link the attribution of science to the changing climate? We know in Uganda that some of the glaciers on mountain ranges have been receding. You remember the media stories of Lake Victoria when some of it received a low level in its waters, but no one was concerned. They thought that it is business as usual. Now we have the small lake Wamala, which is also receding faster, and maize, for some of you who are farmers, might become almost impracticable in Uganda. But for those who are planting cassava and banana, you can continue to do business. For the cattle keepers, climate has limited, not significantly, impact livestock, as it does with crops. But that does not conclude that it does not affect livestock. But on a scale, it affects more of the crops. And the projections for the next 20 to 50 years shows that maize, coffee are the most culprits. And this concludes to what is happening as per the GDP. As you know, Uganda's GDP is not what you all want to see. Currently, we are growing at around 4.1%, and government had planned around 7%. And if you read the economic analysis printed published by Minister of Finance, they have adduced issues of changing weather, especially the rain-fed agriculture affecting GDP growth. Yesterday, I think some of you in the news you heard that the target of exporting 20 million bags, which government has set by 2020, is not going to be achieved and has been pushed to 2022. But still, the science we have on Ugandan climate indicates the growing belt for coffee in Uganda is going to be hardly impacted on. So the growing areas for coffee will not support coffee anymore. So, what does that mean? The reality is people are suffering, people are devastated. Environment Act, we have the energy policies, the climate policies, and so forth and so on. But why are we still not protected, and why are we still highly vulnerable? Maybe this is a question I'm putting before this meeting. Lastly, as I want to conclude, there have been a number of interventions on how to address climate change. And as we try to continue to explore the different interventions, one of the key things which still strikes my mind is, you see, climate change has no boundaries. It does not cross into only a single sector. It affects agriculture, it is affecting health, it's affecting, backs and transport. So it is multidisciplinary, and it cuts across so many borders. Meaning that one piece of legislation alone cannot address the impacts of climate change. Meaning that if you have an Environment Act, for example, the recent one in 2019, it's not enough. It will only address the impacts which are ecosystem related. But it won't address now the energy related impacts. The same applies to those in health, and the same applies to those in works and transport. So, we look forward to this good discussion, and as I started, I started by trying to define what climate is, an aggregation of the key categories of nature. So it is a public good. One of the symptoms we still suffer from is legislating based on public trust. So if you are thinking of legislating climate change on the issues of public trust, I think climate change has passed the principle of public trust domain. Let's also look at the issue of duty, the duty of care, and here I'm looking at who is supposed to do what and when. Thank you very much.
If I were a judicial officer, what is that kind of evidence that will convince me to really hold an extractive company or a polluter liable for climate change? How would I attribute fault? How would I apportion liability? And how would I award damage to the poorest, the grassroots communities that are normally the worst to be affected by landslides and all that? The 2019 National Environment Act, Section 2, the Interpretation Act, defines climate change. So, maybe somebody has already talked about it. It's now a creature of our law. And so, the right to a stable atmosphere, in my view, has to be found in the right to a clean and healthy environment, enshrined in Article 39 of the Constitution. And European and American courts have already passed judgments on the right to a stable climate, being a constitutional question of the 21st century, and insisting that the right to a climate system capable of sustaining human life is fundamental. I'm going to email those cases to His Worship Angoria, and they can be shared. And the courts are now realizing a sufficient causal link that can be assumed to exist between, because Mr. Robert Bachika here indicated that climate change is universal. So there's a causal link between emissions that take place in China and then to activities that the landslides, the flooding that will happen in Uganda. But of course there are those real causes that we see, like deforestation, and I'll get there in a few. Then we have also in our law the principles of environmental management. The Section 5 of the 2019 has expounded the principles much more than the traditional ones. We used to have polluter pays and all that. And one of the principles is that it's been made clear, 5G, that where there are threats of irreversible harm or damage to human health, lack of scientific certainty is not to be used for a reason for postponing cost-effective measures. And the reason I bring up this is that previously we've had applications for an interim orders, and I think this was National Association of Professional Environmentalists versus Hima Cement. I think Justice Kakuri is one who handled that application, 2008 or 8. And the ruling was that, you see, the balance of convenience tilts in favor of the mining company. And one of the texts I remember was that there had been no threat, had not been demonstrated, irreversible harm. One of those grounds of granting an injunction. And yet clearly, this principle, when you're adjudicating these cases, let's go back to these principles, because they are the ones, by the way, that set the entire roadmap of the National Environment Act. Then there is another principle on that private projects, the impacts of climate change must be assessed in all these private projects. So now a principle of our law in Section 5 of the Principles of the Environment Management Act. Of course, now the question is, how about these projects that were already approved before this law passed? And when you read, the reports are really big, 1,000 pages, but a few that I've read, none mention the impacts of climate change. So what happens now that we have this law in place? It is up to all of us to apply legal principles and see. But then there's what Robert and other speakers have been speaking about, the attribution science. And as if you listen to BBC yesterday and today, you must have heard that a group of 11,000 scientists sat together and signed a journal that indicates that the world is into a serious crisis. And these are studies that were done comparing rates and emissions in the last 50 years and coming to a conclusion that climate change is worsening. So this is attribution science, which I think now need no proof, because even the NEMA, the Climate Change Department, alludes to this. So I wouldn't expect, if there's a dispute involving climate change, the last I would expect is for a court to really task me to prove that there's climate change. Perhaps maybe it's judicial notice, or yes, because it's a judicial notice matter, or government records indicate everywhere, and then attribution science indicates that there's so much of this. And then the attribution scientists apportion blame mostly to the fossil fuel companies. And we're speaking about petroleum, the cement industry. They say that petroleum and cement companies are a source of 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, these include the Total, the ExxonMobil and all that. And so this can be seen in a carbon measures report, whereby, so it would be still not so difficult for me to convince that Total Uganda or Talo are part of the emitters with these reports. And then we have also, they say 6% is from from domestic animals. I think Robert and Bernard are going to talk about that. I don't know the science there, how cattle and cows contribute to this. There's a whole talk of reducing emissions through, cutting on those, on the domestic animals and all that. But then the courts, over the English and US courts have developed principles that relate to, that try to prove liability. And one of the principles, these are taught principles that have extended now to climate change. We have the, for example, the market share liability. How do you determine the market share of each of the defendants? Let's say if you're suing, if you are alleging that, okay, I know that 70% is clearly emitted by fossil fuel companies, how do you apportion the blame to each of the fuel companies, fossil fuel companies? So some of the market share liability doctrine allows the plaintiff to establish a prima facie case against a group of product manufacturers for an injury caused by one project, even if the plaintiff does not know which defendant from the product originated. And so the liability will be apportioned among the different manufacturers according to the share of the market now. Because the share of the market is easy to determine how much Shell commands, how much Total commands in the market. Then there are many more other principles like the concurrent wrongdoing, where wrongdoers are liable to claim for the same loss. This principle has been applied in Australia. So as recent as 2013, there's also an authority to that. But they're saying the principle is that the loss or damage caused to a plaintiff must be the same loss or damage in the context of economic loss. This is mostly due to where you allege, for example, let's say motor vehicle fumes. I think, was it Volkswagen that has an issue and they are still up and about with the regulator on the emissions. So if somebody came up to sue, it would be, for me, interesting and maybe easy to find evidence against these producers when the share of the market, VW, is very ascertainable, and then the share of emission, the contribution to greenhouse gases is also very ascertainable. And in the future, maybe in our generation, maybe not, we might grapple with some of these things in our courts of law, especially as I suspect when oil production starts, then emissions from refineries, from gas flaring and all that might be too much to bear, that we, the public interest litigators, will come knocking on the doors of justice. So there are many other principles. I think I have about 5 minutes. Enterprise liability, where an otherwise legally unrelated corporation can be jointly liable for some action or vessel being part of that shared enterprise. Or where a plaintiff demonstrates that you've suffered harm because of an industry-wide practice. But you have to the plaintiff must demonstrate that the industrial practice custom was unsafe. And so the point is that these new forms of injustice have called for new forms or new approaches, or looking at different ways of adjudicating on these cases. A big shift from the traditional, legal approaches that we've been used to. And you'll be faced with other arguments, utility arguments of, income generation, employment, the desire to live to the middle income status, and other things. But then also, how do you determine liability? Because, for example, at least globally, it is easy. This report that came out yesterday, they are saying it will take about 200 billion to combat climate-related disasters in the year 2020. But then, how do you assess a climate damage, climate-related damage maybe of 200 people displaced by floods? How do you assess the economic loss, not just loss, but the cultural and heritage aspects related to it, the indigenous species, all that stuff? We had an expert at the Judicial Training Institute who gave, in my view, delivered a very good presentation, and it is in custody of the institute. Maybe it can be shared, on assessing the ecosystem functions and services, and the cash and non-cash aspects of impacts of the environment and climate change. So, they've already spoken about forests, but maybe what I should insist on is that the rate of deforestation is so bad that by 2040 we shall have no forests left, because at least on average we lose 122,000 square hectares, but then we plant only 7,000. We lose 122 and then plant 7,000. So the rate is so bad, and the impacts have already been, we've already had the greenhouse gas effect and all that stuff. So can we reduce reliance on fossil fuels? Can we reduce reliance on biogenic emissions? These are, burning stoves, fireplaces, livestock digestive systems, and landfills, all those decompositions. How about the way we approach cases? There's a recent case where Hoibo Sugar Factory was sued together with Mukam of Europe. It was the destruction of the Goma forest. But in passing the judgment, I'm sure, and correct me here, but I think, is it order 15? One has the judicial has wider latitude to frame wider and bigger issues. But in passing judgment, the judicial officer only confined, I think it is himself, on the question of title. And then did not address that Section 33 of the National Forestry Tree Planting Act requires you need an environmental impact assessment. Did not consider the impacts of such a forest on the lost services of the forest. And of course, UPO's statistics, if you uploaded that up now, it will show you the contribution of forest to GDP. 8%, I think, titles and wetlands, decisions have gone, and somebody, the judicial officer, I think this was in Mengo, looked at only title.
First, let me say it's a privilege to address this distinguished audience. It's not every day that we get such an honor. Usually we meet in courts where the ground is not level. When the ground is tilted against us. So, but today it's kind of leveled. So a few points. From the previous, the morning session, there was a question on the status of international climate change treaties and conventions. There are mainly three that are of importance to climate change, and that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change 1992, the Kyoto Protocol 1997, and the Paris Agreement of 2015. These three agreements have all been ratified by Uganda, although not yet domesticated, because the lawyers here cannot come flying in court quoting these international agreements because they are not part of our laws. But there is an ongoing process, an ongoing process to domesticate these agreements through the climate change, the National Climate Change Bill of, I think it will be published this year. I understand the cabinet has already approved this law, and it's due for publication, and then it will come to Parliament for further debate. So I just have a few remarks. Number one is that it's clear that there is an implementation gap. The laws, we have the enabling law, but implementation on the ground is weak. So what can the judiciary do to enhance that, to bridge that implementation gap? So there are a number of ways in which you can play a role when these matters come to you in the courts. And these matters, I just want to shine an example, shine a spotlight on how these matters may come before the courts. One way is through enforcing consideration of climate change assessments in infrastructure. This could be one of the cases that can come to you. And already in South Africa, we have the example of the Earthlife Africa Johannesburg versus the Minister of Environment Affairs and Thaba-based power project. In that case, the court ruled that the government was under an obligation to consider climate change before issuing a certificate approval for the coal project. This was a coal project which had been given a permit without considering climate change in the EIA. And there is also an ongoing challenge against the Tirenga, court challenge against the Tirenga oil project. I don't know whether it might be before some of you, but some civil society organizations have launched a challenge against the Tirenga oil project. And I think climate change is probably one of the issues they are raising, that climate change was not adequately considered before the EIA certificate was issued. So these are type examples of some cases that will come your way. The other type of cases that are likely to come before your courts are human rights based cases, where the litigants allege that because of the failure to address government advocate to address climate change, this has violated their fundamental human rights. And we already have examples. For instance, in Pakistan, Ashka Legal versus Pakistan federal government. In that case, the court ruled that the failure by the government to implement the 2012 National Climate Change Policy was a violation to the fundamental human rights of Pakistani citizens. So already the cases are in the system globally. When you look at the global picture, the cases are already being handled and the judges are delivering judgments. So probably this can have persuasive value when they come before you, when similar matters come before you. The other example of the human rights-based action was in the case of Bodayeva versus the Russian government, where the International Court of Justice held that the failure by the Russian government to protect citizens from a landslide, yet they knew that the citizens were under risk of a landslide, was a violation to the right of life, to the right to life of the Russian citizens, the affected Russian citizens. So that case again is it has some persuasive value as far as the human rights angle to climate change is concerned. In conclusion, going forward, what can be done? Maybe before I go to that, there's also a case that is in the pipeline, Mbabasi and others versus the Attorney General and NEMA. This is the climate change case where one of the orders sought is that the government should step up the measures being taken to address climate change. It is still in the system. I don't know the way in which to be decided. We'll wait and see. Now, in conclusion, recommendations to in what ways can we step up the fight to combat climate change? One way is to have more of these trainings. I think Greenwatch and the other players will need to step up this and roll it out, probably countrywide, so that there is more intensive training to expose judicial officers and even lawyers, by the way, in issues of climate change and how they can be dealt with. Number two is to establish specialized courts. I would be happy if an environmental court is established, just like we have the land division, the commercial division, the family division. I think it would be nice to have a court specialized in environmental issues. And this has been done, for instance, in Kenya, they have a land and environment court, as well as in India, they have the National Environmental Tribunal. And in the current law, I think the National Environment Act, there is a proposed National Environmental Tribunal. But this, of course, is yet to be established. The final point is just for your information that there is a database, an online database for climate change cases, and this is being run by the Grantham Research Institute of the London School of Economics of the world, including the decided cases. So it's a resource that you can use. Then there's also the Stability Center for Climate Change Law, run by the Columbia University in the US. Thank you very much.